Welcome to the Gentleman Project podcast. I'm Kirk Chug.
And I'm Corey Moore. Today we have Dave Rutter on the podcast, who, as we were talking before we came in here, we've known each other actually quite a long time. We need to spend more time together, but I think we met the first time about 20 years ago. And Dave's the CEO of Costa Vida, amongst many other entrepreneurial things that I know he's involved in. So Dave, thanks for being on the podcast with us.
Thank you for having me. And I think in the time we've known each other, you've stayed about the same age, but I think I've gotten a lot older. So I need to drink whatever water you're drinking or do something.
I think you just have a bad memory. Trust me, my wife is like, you're getting old. There's a lot of gray in there.
There's a little bit more gray in the beard than the last time I saw you even. So,
well, there you go. Dave, tell us a little bit about your background. Tell us your story. Where are you from? Where'd you grow up? Maybe a little bit about how you grew up, that kind of thing.
Okay. I was actually born in LA, but my family moved to Utah when I was really young. And so all of my schooling was in Utah County. And I kind of grew up in a very family values, with my family. I was taught those values from a young age from my parents. And I'm the third of 5 children. I think for me, I always grew up, I was one of these weird kids that always had some kind of business going on as I was growing up. I was talking to somebody about this the other night. I sold stuff door to door. I sold Fuller Brush, if you can believe that. I had my big packet of stuff that was as big as me going door to door. I would make a candy store and sell, buy candy in bulk and then sell it to the other kids at school. Even these little metal taps that I'm sure our teachers absolutely hated, but we used to nail them to the bottom of our shoes and then you could slide down the halls at school.
Yeah.
I sold those.
You sold those.
I
Nice.
sold those at school. And it was a heck on the floors and the waxing, I'm sure. But so I always had stuff like that going on. I always had that edge toward business. Served a mission for my church. When I came back, I took a job at a local restaurant and Prestwich Farms down in Orem, and really kind of fell in love with the energy of that business. I waited tables and actually met my wife there. And, we eventually got married, but the food business kind of got into my soul a little bit. And so we were developing other businesses. We actually sold that restaurant at one point and had we had a networking business that we were doing. So we had kind of retired a little bit from conventional business. I was about 33 or 34 years old. And I had these amazing visions of my wife and I going to lunch together every day and all these things. And after about a week, she came into my office and she said, I'm going to have to cut you loose if you don't find something else to do, because you have totally invaded my schedule and I actually do have a life. And so we got some other things going. And one of those things was, I had a friend of mine call me that was a bowler, and he said, hey, the place that I bowl is being sold to Gold's Gym. They made me an offer to buy the bowling equipment. Do you think I should do it? I said, wow, I don't have any idea. I don't know anything about bowling, And I said, but I have a friend who does. And so I called a friend of mine, my business partner today, Sean Collins. And so we got talking about this, and it went from maybe we'd just buy this equipment and sell it overseas to let's open a bowling center in Salt Lake City, and so we did. And that was in August of 2001. We were open about 3 weeks when September 11th of that year, happened. And so we obviously didn't know what was going to happen with that. We just invested everything we owned in this thing and thought, what's going on with our world? But we opened that first one. We opened a second one down in Provo and kind of thinking, we'll just invest in these and have somebody run them for us. And that lasted a few months. And then we realized we're going to lose everything we own if we don't get in and figure these out. And so we kind of started to move along with that brand and opened 3 or 4 properties here in Utah, and then one in Colorado. At the same time, my brother-in-law was actually working with us in Fat Cat Salt Lake City. And he came to us with this idea. He said, I want to start this Mexican grill. I'm going to call it Costa Azul. I just really think it could be a great thing. Would you guys financially back me to do it? And we said, no. we're too busy doing what we're doing, and our money is here, but go to town. And so he partnered up with another gentleman by the name of J.D. Gardner. So J.D. Gardner and Kenny Prestwich got together, and they formed this and opened the first Costa Azul at the time in Layton, Utah. And we sat back and watched as this thing just went absolutely nuts, over the next several months. And we drove up there. I'll never forget. I mean, one day we drove up there and it was lunchtime and there was a line out the door, and we looked at each other and said, this could have been our concept. I mean, we really blew this, And so we sat down with him in between the lunch and dinner rush and said, okay, you're going to become a franchisor, and we're going to become your first franchisees. And so we did that. And so we took our Fat Cats in Provo, the restaurant that it had in it, had competition right up the street. It wasn't really working in there. And so we closed Saturday night as that brand and opened Monday morning as a Costa Azules. We had a 36-hour.
No kidding. I did not know that.
Yeah, 36 hours to change it over. So when our guys now say, hey, we need a month to do a remodel, it's like, yeah, we did that over a weekend. But anyway, same experience. I mean, so we had this little Fat Cats down there in Provo. It's our smallest one. But now this Costa Azul that we open in there, just insane growth. I mean, same thing. And it's such a clunky, experience there. You kind of have to walk through the bowling center to get into the restaurant. It's just this weird thing, but it turns into the fastest growing one in the chain at that point. Of course, it was only number 2, but then, over the next couple of years, I mean, it did really well. So much so that it made us view it from the standpoint of, hey, we're just trying to rescue a Fat Cats property here with a better food service for that environment, to now we're going to kind of do a parallel path here, and we'll pursue Costa and we'll pursue Fat Cats as well. And so that's what we started to do. And as we did that, the Fat Cats business, really started to grow for us. And we hit a point where it didn't make a lot of sense to continue on the same way that it was. I think we had about 13 restaurants out of the 22 or something that the company owned. And at that point, we went to Kenny and JD and said, hey, let's buy you, because they weren't operating restaurants at the time. We were. And so all potential franchisees were coming through us anyway. And so we bought them out actually, I say we bought them out. They actually still own some. Kenny Prestwich, who's my brother-in-law, he still works with us today, and JD serves on our board, and they're just great, as the founders. I mean, they're just fantastic. And but we took over the company in 2008, 2009, and it's been a great ride ever since. So today we have about 93, 94 restaurants. We're in 14 states. We've transitioned a little bit. We don't franchise as much anymore. We're really building company stores. And Fat Cats really at the same time has kind of taken a different approach from our first properties that we opened, where it was really just bowling and food and arcade and billiards and those kind of things, to where now the movie theater business is a big part of what we do. And so we have 5 properties now that are movie theaters, and that business it's on a tear all of its own. I mean, it's doing really, really well, and we're just having fun. So my partner and I are CEOs of Costa Vida. We have another CEO over at Fat Cats for us. His name's Paul Brockbank. He's doing a fantastic job, and life is good.
That's cool. So give us a little bit of background on your family. Do you have kids? And
I do.
How old are they?
I have 6. My oldest, if you can believe it, is 40. She turned 40 this year.
I can't believe it. Yeah, you look barely over there. 40.
She's going to hit me with a baseball bat for saying that. But, so she's 40, and our youngest is a junior in high school. So we go from 40 down to 17.
Wow.
And we have 4 of our 6 children are married, and we have 14 grandkids.
Wow.
In Utah County, all around us. So it's amazing.
So as you're going through this building of Costa Vida and Fat Cats and the movie business now, you obviously were probably pulled 100 different directions. And one of those directions was probably towards home. So talk to us about how you managed that, and what were some of the best practices that you used as a busy CEO that's trying to build a company to the size that it is today, and still being an involved dad at home?
That's a great question. And it's the balance fight that we all fight. Right. So I think my time is a little bit more flexible now, actually, than it was during those early years. During those early years, I was, as a young father, 20 years ago, 21 years ago, and I was doing other stuff before that. But I think, as I think back on my early years of being a father, I probably allowed my family to take second place a little bit there some, and I was just taught a profound principle from a gentleman one day who I was talking to, and he said, Dave, wherever you're at, be there. And it's such a simple concept, but it makes so much sense, because a lot of times for me, when I was home doing my thing, but my mind was always back at work. What are those things that I'm missing? What have I got to do to prepare for tomorrow or for this meeting or that or whatever? And so I'm just distracted. I see this vision of this guy out there, pushing his child on a swing, but yet all the while he's in the middle of something else, whether he's on a phone or whatever. And maybe it wasn't with a phone when my kids were young, but I felt like I was kind of distracted that way. But when this person said this to me, and I just began to view it in a different way. And so though my time at home was limited, I think what I really tried to do is to, before I walked in the house, I'd park my car in the garage or in the driveway and detox for a minute. And then I'd walk in the house and try to be there, one, for my wife, who'd been around some super, rambunctious kids all day, and really had grown up in an environment where she was working too. And so now she's home. And that's a tougher transition, for her at that time, because she grew up in a very entrepreneurial family. And so to go in and really, one, try to give her a break, but also try to communicate. Because I think a lot of times as dads, our level of communication is, dear, how was your day? And if she's asking me that question, I'm saying, great, it was good, and I don't talk anything more about it, but she wants to talk, and so trying to connect in a different way with my wife and my children, I think, is probably the most important thing. It's exciting now, because 3 of our 4 married kids actually work with us, so I see them, cool, on a regular basis. That has its challenges too, because it's that professional side of it versus the family and dad and child side. And so, but at least from that side, we do see each other. I still have 2 kids at home. But I think it's just the priority, because ultimately, as exciting as our business life has been, and we've certainly been blessed, it's not, as I sit around on my 85th birthday and think, what do I want my family to say about me, or what's going to be on my gravestone? It's not, I had all these restaurants and he had all this stuff. It's like, none of that stuff you take with you. It's the people that you impact, and we've been blessed to be able to do that. And so I think with our family and with the team members that we work with is viewing people the way they should be viewed, as individuals of incredible worth, and not sometimes, I think, in business how we do that, it's kind of a means to an end. They help us get to a place. Yeah. And people with that philosophy in the tight labor markets that we deal with are really suffering.
They're suffering
right
now.
Really suffering.
Because I think people can feel that, whether it's at home with your kids or your wife. As you walk in, they know what you're thinking, what's going on in your head. And I think the same thing goes with employees. If they just see themselves as a means to an end to make a profit for you, then they're not going to be dedicated employees to you. They're not going to have any loyalty when the next job offer comes up. Props to you for, taking that philosophy. I noticed that even in your bio is written that you try to treat the people, your team members, as part of the business family. So I think whether it's in business or at home, they can tell.
Yeah.
They can tell for sure.
Yeah, there's no question. And that's the joy of it, to be honest with you. We all do a lot of things, and we're very busy, but at the end of the day, it's those relationships. Those are the things that really matter. And when you see, individuals that come from tough situations. I think of some of our team members and our managing partners today, but times where they were sleeping on couches and rummaging through garbage cans for food, to now buying and owning their own home and paying off cars. And those kind of things. It's that kind of stuff that makes everything that we do worth it. And ultimately, your first point of impact is with, in my case, my wife, my spouse, and my family. And then I think it bleeds out there, and the family actually can get pretty large.
That's neat.
Yeah.
So tell me where this entrepreneurial spirit came from. Was that something that your parents were entrepreneurial and you got it that way? Did they teach you anything? And have you taught any of that to your kids? I mean, being an entrepreneur isn't right or wrong. It's just something that you do or don't do, right? And so talk to me about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. No, I didn't grow up in an entrepreneurial family. My dad worked a job. He actually, after I left the home, owned a business, and that was the first time he had owned a bit. Well, that's not true. He had a couple of businesses that he owned, but I wouldn't term my dad as entrepreneurial. I think what I gained from my parents, one, is just an absolute values-based, morality-based type of work ethic and hard work and respectful and integrity and those kind of things that I've always tried to model. We try to do our best there. And but I think where I probably it was just something that I think I had, and then I married a girl, Kim Prestwich, whose dad was absolutely an entrepreneur's entrepreneur. I mean, he was an early KFC franchisee. He had all kinds of different businesses, and so I think that kind of fueled that more for me. I was doing the little stuff I was doing as a kid, but when I met him and went to work for the family business, and then my wife and I actually bought that restaurant away from the rest of the family as they moved out of the area. And then we just kind of continued on from there. And I think that my kids, it's interesting with my children. I have a couple of them that are pretty entrepreneurial. 3 of the 4 of them work for us, but also have other things going on. So yeah, my son that I have at home, I have a 19-year-old at home that just graduated from high school that, is actually pretty entrepreneurial as well. And so I think that when there's a good opportunity for children to go into where they feel like, wow, I'm doing something for the family to help grow a family business or something, they may see that as a vehicle rather than I need to go through the pain of starting my own thing. Because truthfully, with my younger children, with my last 2, we adopted our last 2, and there's a 10-year gap in there. But my older kids, it was pretty thin for us in those early years. We're investing in pretty much everything that we were doing, and weren't pulling a lot out of the companies. And so they saw both sides of that, and so I think they each have their own path there, but couldn't be prouder of my children. I mean, they're phenomenal. Even the one that doesn't work for us, we'll get him sooner or later. But
well, you mentioned hard work, and you mentioned integrity, and you mentioned, a moral compass kind of a thing. And I think we all, as parents, I'm like, am I doing a good job? Are they going to leave, my nest? And are they going to have those same kind of things? And I really want to make sure they do. And I think when they're younger, it's hard to tell. Am I giving them that? Do they have that? So, talk to me about, how do you feel like that was instilled in you? Like, what was the actual, how did your parents instill that in you or try to? And how have you tried to do that with your kids or grandkids? How do you instill hard work and integrity and try to make it stick, right? Like, I'm trying to do that, but I often ask myself, am I doing a good enough job? Are they really getting what I'm talking to them about? So maybe if you have some comment on that.
I'm sure they are, Corey. I mean, just knowing you as much as I do, but I think for me, my dad wasn't one who was always in my face teaching it, but he modeled it. He lived it. He never gave me an excuse. I mean, that's the truth of it. Never gave me excuse. I mean, I grew up in this, my wife calls it this perfect little bubble. I never heard my parents say a curse word growing up, so I only heard one fight, and it wasn't even really a fight. And I went to school the next day and told all my friends my parents were getting a divorce because I heard them fight. And nothing could have been further from the truth. But they just modeled this lifestyle of faith and family and hard work and his value. Never heard my dad say a negative word about my mom or vice versa. I mean, it was just this, this idealistic, kind of an environment. And we live in such a different world today because we have so much other input coming at us all the time. I mean, back then we had 3 TV channels and that was basically it. But with my family, he to this day, the best man that I know is my dad, and never made a lot of money. But just absolutely lived true to who he was, who he is. My dad's 90, coming up on 92 now, and so I think for me, that's just what I've tried to model with my kids. I ask myself the same questions that you ask, Corey, now I have four kids that are married and 2 still at home, but did I really teach them that? Because there's so much confusion in the world today. There's so much divisiveness. There's so much, there's an opinion on everything. And it's like, where do you find truth? Where do you get, where do you look to for those sources? And so one thing that we have tried to regularly do as a family, when earlier on it was 1 week. I mean, now we try to go 2, but a couple weeks a year at Lake Powell. I mean, just a time where phones are off and it's just us and maybe a couple of other families, but we have that time together that we create. We have a cabin up in Daniel Summit. We try to do that same thing, that we try to find those weekends or whatever that we can get away and just kind of reconnect on those things. I think the thing that if anything that I have strived to do as an example from my parents was just to be that kind of example for my kids. As I mentioned, 3 of them work for me, so they see us on the hard days and the good days. And it'd be hard for me to preach values that we have up on our wall, but in meetings or in tough situations or lease negotiations or something that we're trying to figure out that's hard, to see an entirely different, kind of behavior modeled. And so it has really driven me. I keep, on my wall at work, actually, a picture of my grandpa. He owned a tiny little grocery store up in Malad, Idaho, called the Millstream Grocery. Never made a lot of money, but he knew what his calling was there. And his calling was to work with the townspeople. They said in this little town of 2,700 people, he'd have an office and he'd have people lined up at the door, to wait to come and visit with him. It used to frustrate his kids because they needed his help checking people out, but we would do it. He was always helping other people.
That's great.
But it's just that kind of thing has resonated with me. And so I'm probably not a great example of it in a lot of ways, but I do strive to continue to model the things that I was taught. And thankfully I have a partner who's kind of cut from the same cloth that way. And so we check each other if we feel like we're getting off, but it's a balance in life is an interesting thing. You always try to walk that line of, the perfect scenario. I don't know that you ever get to that place, but you just try to capture the moments you can capture that day and be present where you are and give the best that you can, with the situations in front of it. I mean, if COVID has taught us anything, it's taught us that, we all had to adapt and have had to continue to adapt during that time.
Yeah. If you think back, sounds like your dad was an amazing man and kind of just lived that quiet life of integrity. And luckily that transferred to you because you're trying to teach it as well, which means you've internalized it to some point. You can take a minute if you need to think of this, but can you share with us something, an experience that you had with your dad? Could be big or little, that you think that was the best moment of teaching that my dad had with me.
Yeah. I mean, I actually don't need to think about that one. My dad, as I mentioned before, I think my dad had 2 experiences where he owned his own business. He was a partner in one of them and then the sole owner in another one. The first one was a glass company. And he partnered up with a guy that lived right around the corner from us. And in time that it wasn't working, and so my dad left to go find something else. And and in time, the business became insolvent several months later, maybe it was a year later or so. And my dad went back in and paid off the debt of that company. And I don't know that my dad told me that, but that's an experience with my dad that I either heard about from him or his partner or my mom or somebody. But that to me, I just thought that that's the kind of person I want to be. So as a young child growing up and knowing that my dad experienced that and put, for a family that didn't have a lot of money, it wasn't like we were in good shape and he just wrote checks. I mean, this is stuff that he paid out over time. I don't know how many years, but paid out over time. And for me, that just had a profound impact.
Yeah, that's beyond what most people would just say. A lot of people just say, well, I exited the business. I'm out of the business and I'm sorry it didn't work.
Yeah.
Most people would do that.
Yeah.
That's a higher level of integrity, for lack of a better word, right? That's cool. That's a good story. I like that.
That's my dad. Yeah, that's the kind of person he has always been.
And something I'm sure you've shared with your own kids.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think at the end of the day, not to get too preachy here, but this is integrity at the end of the day is really, it's something that is sold so cheaply, for people. I remember seeing a movie years ago called The Family Man with Nicolas Cage. And there's this kind of angel guy that comes in, but to make a long story short, Nicolas Cage is in there and the angel is checking somebody out, and this girl hands him a $10 bill to buy whatever she was buying, and he gave her change for a 20. And so she looked at it for a minute, and then she turned around and walked out, and this angel says to Nicolas Cage, "That's so disappointing. She'd sell her integrity for $10. $10, and I think in our society today, as we look at, those things that are truly important, if we ourselves as people could just follow the golden rule, strive to treat other people the way that we want to be treated, so much of what we're experiencing in our world today would kind of melt into the sidelines,
Yeah. I don't remember that movie, but I think it'd be
you got to watch it.
great to watch.
Love that movie. That's a good movie, man.
Such a good movie.
Because there's about 1,000 of those lessons or more in that movie. The whole movie's about looking at your life and going, wait a minute.
Yeah. Well, he kind of had it all in the beginning, but he's single but he's got all the money in the world. And then he sees an alternate lifestyle. He marries his high school or college sweetheart and they're broke. He's working in a tire store, but that's exactly right.
But he's got kids and he loves them. And so then he has to go back to his old life, and he's like, he doesn't want to leave.
Couldn't do it.
He doesn't want to go back to the fancy apartment in New York and the Lamborghini because he wants his family.
Yeah.
And it's a great.
I love that that show.
Oh, I know it well.
A lot of people don't know that show. But it's
good.
Favorites.
It's good.
I've had that conversation recently, and several times, we've had something like that happen, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was not that long ago. It was like somebody had pulled through the car wash and had not pushed stop, and we pulled in there, and I mentioned to my son, I was like, they didn't push stop on that over there. You want a free car wash? And he looked at me kind of like, what would you say that for?
Yeah.
And and then I had that conversation and I asked that question exactly that way. I said, how much would you sell your integrity for? Is it a free car wash? It's like, my integrity is worth more than that. And it was just kind of like a short teaching experience.
That's a great one.
But I hope at some point they go, yeah, my dad used to mention that, what's your integrity worth? Because someday it's going to be a lease negotiation. Mm-hmm. It's going to be something on a $20 million property. It's going to be a bid that didn't go your way that you could change something on. Mm-hmm. And
you're so right with that, because sometimes we view our life like it's these great, big, monumental things, but the truth of it is most of it are those small, simple things, that just those day-to-day interactions in life that we think sometimes our children aren't watching. If we've learned anything, we've learned they are watching, they do know. And they see those small little actions that we do. And it's not to say we don't make mistakes. Heck, we do every day. But I think as a general rule, as they see us strive to become who we're trying to teach them to become as well, that we're on that same pathway that they're on, it resonates. We may not think so at the time, but in time, it does resonate, I believe.
So talk to us about what led to adoption and you have 2 adopted kids, it sounds like. I didn't know that, but tell us that story.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's a very cool story. We actually have 4 adopted grandchildren too. So it's we have a pretty multicultural family, but we were done. I mean, we were done having children. We had 4 children, great family, and we had started Fat Cats. And as I mentioned, we weren't making any money. I mean, it was the money flow was going the other way. And my wife and I and our family went to Lagoon one night for Frightmares, October 17th of 2002. And which we never did. We're not big Lagoon people. But we run across some friends of ours who had a friend with them who had this little African-American child that she was carrying, that she had with her. And of course, my wife ran right over. My wife has an adopted sister who's Black. And so she ran right over and said, I think it's such a great thing that you've adopted this child. I have a sister who's Black. And the lady said, well, that's great, but I haven't adopted him. I'm actually interim care for him until he gets placed. And so I looked at him and thought he was cute and grabbed my boys and we were off to ride the roller coaster. Honestly, did not think a thing about it. And we're riding home. And my wife says, oh, wasn't that little boy cute? And I said, yeah, he was beautiful. And I come home from work the next day and she's like, I can't get this little boy out of my mind. And I came home from the next day and she said, I think we're supposed to adopt this little boy. And I said, okay, tap the brakes. I mean, there's no way. We have no money. Our youngest child is 10. Let's not go down this road. Come home from work the next day and she's like, I went to see him. As you can tell, my wife she does her thing, and she said, I went to see him. Well, it turns out that he was literally in living with these people right around the corner from us. I mean, just,
oh, wow.
Less than a minute from our house. And she said, Dave, you have to come. We're supposed to adopt this little boy. And so I went with her and I picked this little boy up and he looked into my eyes and it was like, I'm looking at my son. It was just absolutely immediate that I knew that. And so we had no idea how we would do it. He was already supposed to be placed with someone else. But we said, okay, we'll do everything that we can to adopt him and then just kind of let things happen as they happen. Well, 2.5 weeks later, he was in our home. We had everything fell into place. We had the home study. It was just this absolutely miraculous thing. And he's our 19-year-old today and just a delight. And then when we adopted once, we knew that we would adopt again. I mean, we wanted to have somebody for him to grow up with. And so then we adopted his little sister, and that was about 2 years later. So there are our 2 youngest, Case and Chloe, and he just graduated. She's a junior in high school, and they're just an absolute delight. And then now we have our oldest daughter has 3 of her own natural children, has adopted 3 others. And then our next oldest son has adopted 1. So, yeah, so of our 14 grandchildren, 4 of them are adopted.
What a beautiful story.
It's wonderful. Yeah.
Well, what talk to me about what your kids were like. Did they come to you before they adopted? Did they just do that on their own? Like, where did their adoption? I mean, obviously they saw you adopt and it was a great thing for the family, it sounds like, and wonderful, but that doesn't just mean that, your kids are going to start adopting. Yeah. So where did that come from?
So our oldest, she married just a phenomenal individual from Tonga, and his upbringing is kind of the world is my family. I mean, he believes that God puts people in his path for a reason, and so they bring him into their home. And thankfully my daughter is the same way. And so cool. I honestly don't ever remember them talking to us about it. Their oldest 2 that they adopted came from when my daughter actually was running our Fat Cats in Salt Lake City. There was this boy who came in there every day and just stayed all day long. And so finally she just said, why are you here? I mean, it turned out that he was kind of a refugee from Africa, and he was here with his uncle, but his uncle is a long haul truck driver. And so he'd just hang out wherever he could while his uncle was gone for a couple of weeks at a time or a week at a time. And so finally she actually invited that little boy, that young boy, I mean, he's 15 or 16, to stay at her home. Well, years later, he fathered 2 children. Those are their first 2 adopted children. And then the The next one was they had a girl coming over from Tonga to actually be a nanny for him when my daughter was pregnant with her last child. But when she showed up, she was pregnant. The nanny was. And so instead of my daughter getting this help taking care of her kids, now she's taking care of the nanny who's morning sick. But before the nanny went back to Tonga, she said, I'd like, you two to take this child. And that's a full Tongan child. And so that's their third adopted. So they have 3 natural children, 3 adopted. And then my son who adopted, he adopted a half sister of those 2 older ones that my sister had. So they're cousins, but also half siblings. And that's an entire other story. But it's, if you ever want to see God's hand at work, I mean, you see it through adoption. I mean, it absolutely happens that way.
There's more adoption stories that we just kind of run into during the podcast than I ever expected.
Way more, yeah.
And every one of them seems to be a story of, I would never do it any other way. I've never heard an adoption story and they say, I regret doing that.
It's true. Because
you can impact somebody's life for the better, regardless of who they are, where they come from, or how they come into your life. And that's a testament to just reaching out and being a part of somebody's life. Has,
and the impact,
changing that.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. The impact, and it goes both ways. I mean, so many people have come to us talking about our 2 adopted children, Case and Chloe, and what a blessing, that you are in their lives. And, I mean, knowing the background that they could have had and all those things, but the blessing has been ours, because they, when we adopted our son, I mean, our kids were, we had 3 teenagers at that point. And so they're chasing things and doing their thing. And we adopted him and they all came back. I mean, them and their friends, and I mean, we had a house full every night and so that just kind of carried through. So it's been a tremendous blessing in our life, as well as I hopefully, been a blessing in theirs also.
Well, I think that adoption kind of incorporates a lot of those qualities that we talk about that we want to instill in our kids.
Yeah.
Looking outside yourself, service, humility, and a lot of the things that we hope they internalize. And instead of just having to pull them aside and say, let me teach you about humility. Let me teach you about living outside of yourself and looking for opportunities to serve. Through adoption, you're showing them all of those things at once.
Yeah.
And so, I'm sure that they'll look back, and in your family history and the Rutter family history, in 2 or 3 generations, that's going to be part of your family's story. And hopefully the people that you've never met that are part of your family line will say, my great grandpa Rutter and grandma did this, and it's changed our family for the better.
Yeah.
And, that's the only way we live on. Like, we really don't take, like you said, anything with us. It's only the relationships that we leave behind and the lessons that we teach. So that's what we hope people get out of the podcast, is by listening to stories they can relate to and say, this is really something I'm going to be where I am. Like that simple little lesson. It can't be any more simple than that, but how many of us really need to take that advice?
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, and really, you say great grandpa Rutter, but it'd really be great grandma Rutter, because she's the one who listened. I mean, for me, I was too caught up in riding the rides at Lagoon. For her, she was the one who listened and said, okay, there's something here I'm supposed to do. So,
yeah. Well, you've had, 4 children get married, right? And I always bring this topic up because I think I'm afraid for my girls to get married, but, talk to us about any advice about, having kids get married and, watch them go through that process, any advice to dads that are going to get ready for that here soon?
Well, I think, and again, this goes back to Lake Powell. It's been part of the culture of our family, but that is one thing we would always do. We'd always take, if they were considering it, they'd come to Powell with us, because you could tell so much about somebody by a week at Powell. I mean, just, are you willing to jump up and help, or you're in a big windstorm and anchor ropes need to be tightened or whatever? Are they in watching TV, or are they out helping? And so you see a lot, and
that's a good point.
Yeah. And I just think somebody who I know is going to love my child, specifically my girls. And I couldn't be more thrilled with with the two sons-in-law that I have that absolutely cherish my daughters. And that's, as a dad, that's most important. Your sons are going to take care of themselves. And I have absolutely incredible daughters-in-law as well. And, but your sons are going to kind of take care of themselves, but you want your daughters to be treated like queens, and thankfully we have. And so it's, I think kindness is such a, something that we don't think of, enough, but just that simple act of being kind, to somebody else, putting somebody else's needs before your own. We live in a world that by and large is pretty selfish, I think. And so people who are willing to put somebody else's needs before their own, they're going to take care of my daughter. So thankfully we have sons-in-law that do that. They work hard. They work hard. They're kind. They treat not only my daughters, but their children wonderfully, and can't ask for a whole lot more than that.
So Dave, as we talk values and as we get close to the end of the podcast here, you've talked a little bit about how you want your daughters to be treated, right? And I think a lot of people in their mind will say, that's kind of my definition of what I hope my son-in-laws are. What I hope that they're gentlemen. They treat my daughters with respect. If you had to answer the question, what do you think a gentleman is? How would you answer that question?
Yeah, that's a great one. So when I think of a gentleman, I go back immediately again to my dad. And so I think that probably one of the things that hit me most, has always hit me most with my dad, is just, I never heard him utter a negative word about someone else. I mean, literally, I can't remember one time that I ever heard him do that. And he elevated my mom, his wife, to that status. I mean, he treated her that way. Always opened her door, took care of her. She just, she was the queen in my home. And so I think a gentleman, understands who he is and feels a stewardship. Stewardship is kind of a big word, beyond responsibility to me. It's kind of, your stewardship is your kind of God-given responsibility. And so for him, he has viewed his life as a stewardship for others. I mean, not, his eyes haven't been focused inward. I mean, they've been focused outward towards others. And so I think a gentleman has a stewardship of recognizing his place in the world, and that he wants to leave this world better than he found it. And that's not a money question so much as it is an impact question, to me. So I think stewardship, I think kindness, is absolutely a gentlemanly quality. And I think integrity, that you, when you say you're going to be somewhere or do something or fulfill some duty, that it isn't a question. I mean, you do it rather than have your integrity be challenged. And so for me, those would probably be the three words that would come to my mind: stewardship, integrity, and kindness.
That's awesome.
The stewardship one I haven't heard before, and I really like that.
Yeah.
Stewardship.
It takes it to a little bit higher level than just a responsibility.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
And the integrity part too.
Well, I think we have, the truth of it is we're pretty blessed, regardless of what our individual situations are, we're pretty blessed. And, to view that, to just say, I have no responsibility with that, but we do. And so because of what we have, we're in a position where sometimes people will listen to us. Maybe people will listen to this podcast. And so I think we have a responsibility to do those things, to leave the world better, to help people, find a better way. A lot of the people that work with us we know they're not going to make careers in the restaurant business or the family entertainment business. But if in that year or two or three, or hopefully more, that they work with us, they can say, wow, I learned things that are going to help me be a better dad, or help me be a better son, or spouse, or whatever. Then I feel like we've done our job.
Yeah, that's real impact. Very cool.
Well, Dave, thank you so much for being on the podcast. You had some very good insight, and I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you very much. My privilege being here. Thanks for asking.
Dave, thanks for joining us. We hope that you get lots of value out of the podcast. If you would like to share, rate, review the podcast, that sure helps us, and we wouldn't turn down that help. And hope that you have a great week. Be a gentleman.
Thanks, everyone.